The autumn evening air carried the mingled scents of street food and car exhaust through downtown Seattle. Elena Chan adjusted her worn apron and glanced at the clock hanging inside her modest noodle cart. 7:30 p.m. The dinner rush was finally winding down, leaving her with aching feet and flour-dusted hands, but also with enough earnings to cover Maya's school supplies for the week. "Mama, can I help you clean up?" Maya's sweet voice cut through Elena's fatigue. The 6-year-old sat on a small plastic stool behind the cart, her school backpack at her feet and a coloring book spread across her lap. Even at her young age, Maya understood that they were a team, just the two of them against the world. "In a minute, sweetheart," Elena replied, wiping down the metal counter for the third time that evening. "Let me serve this last customer, and then we'll go home. If you are watching this, please subscribe and tell us where you are watching this from." But as she looked up, Elena realized this wasn't going to be an ordinary transaction. An elderly man approached her cart with hesitant, shuffling steps. His clothes, once expensive by the look of the fabric, were now rumpled and stained. His silver hair was disheveled, and his eyes held a confusion that immediately tugged at Elena's heartstrings. "Miss," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I'm terribly sorry to bother you. I can't remember." He fumbled in his pockets, producing 2 crumpled dollar bills and some lint. "I only have this. Could I possibly get just a small portion of something? Anything?" Elena's business sense told her to politely decline. $2 wouldn't even cover the cost of ingredients for a proper serving. But looking at this lost soul, she saw something that reminded her of her own grandfather, who had passed away when she was Maya's age. The same gentle dignity despite obvious confusion, the same pride wounded by having to ask for help. "Of course, sir," she said without hesitation, reaching for her largest bowl. "Please have a seat right here." She gestured to the small plastic table and chair she kept for customers who wanted to eat at the cart. "But I can't pay the full price," he protested weakly. Elena was already ladling her best beef noodle soup, the one that took her 3 hours to prepare each morning. She added extra vegetables, a soft-boiled egg, and even sprinkled some of her precious imported seaweed on top, the kind she usually saved for special occasions. "Don't worry about it," she said, setting the steaming bowl in front of him with a genuine smile. "You're our 100th customer today. House special on the house." It was a lie, of course. He was actually her 37th customer, and every dollar mattered when you were a single mother trying to save for your child's future. But something about this man's gentle manner and obvious distress made Elena want to preserve his dignity. Thomas Sterling, though Elena didn't know his name yet, stared at the bowl in front of him with tears gathering in his clouded eyes. The rich broth sent aromatic steam curling upward, and the noodles were perfectly cooked, neither too soft nor too firm. It had been days since he'd eaten anything substantial, days since he'd remembered where he lived or how to get there. Thank you," he managed, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't remember the last time someone was so kind to a stranger." As he ate, Elena busied herself with cleaning, but she kept one eye on the elderly man. There was something distinguished about him despite his current state, the way he held his chopsticks, his careful manners even while obviously struggling with confusion. She found herself wondering about his story, about the family who must be worried sick about him. "This is the most delicious meal I've had in years," Thomas said after several minutes of silent eating. "The broth, it reminds me of something my late wife used to make. She always said the secret was in the love you put into the cooking." Maya looked up from her coloring book, her dark eyes curious. "Mama always says that too. She says cooking is like giving someone a hug from the inside." Thomas's face lit up at the child's words. "What a wise little girl you have," he told Elena. "She reminds me of someone very special." "What's your name, sir?" Elena asked gently as she continued cleaning around him. Thomas paused, his spoon halfway to his mouth. For a moment, panic flashed across his features. Thomas. My name is Thomas. But He set down the spoon, his hands trembling slightly. I'm afraid I can't remember much else right now. Elena's heart went out to him. She recognized the signs. Her grandfather had shown the same confusion in his final years. That's okay, Thomas. Sometimes we all forget things. The important thing is that you're safe and fed now. Mama, Maya whispered, tugging on Elena's apron. Can Grandpa Thomas come home with us? He looks lonely. Elena smiled at her daughter's compassionate heart, even as she gently explained why that wouldn't be possible. Grandpa Thomas has his own family somewhere, sweetie. They're probably looking for him right now. But what if they can't find him? Maya persisted. What if he gets lost again? As if summoned by the child's concern, the sound of multiple car doors slamming echoed from the street. Elena looked up to see several black SUVs parked nearby, and men in expensive suits scanning the area with obvious urgency. Thomas! One of them called out. Mr. Sterling, we've been searching everywhere. Sir, your family has been worried sick, said another, approaching the cart cautiously. You've been missing for a week. Thomas looked up from his bowl with confusion, then something like recognition flickered in his eyes. David. Is that you? Yes, sir, it's David Morrison, your son's assistant. Alexander has been looking for you day and night. Elena stepped back as the men approached, but Thomas suddenly gripped her hand. Wait, he said with surprising clarity. This young lady, she helped me. She gave me food when I had nothing. You must tell Alexander about her kindness. David Morrison looked at Elena with new interest, taking note of her modest noodle cart and work-worn hands. Ma'am, the Sterling family doesn't forget kindness. Please take my card. We'll be in touch. That's really not necessary, Elena protested, but David was already pressing an elegant business card into her palm. As they helped Thomas to his feet, he turned back to Elena one more time. Thank you, dear. I won't forget this. Neither will my family. Take care of yourself, Thomas, Elena called after him. Come back any time for more noodles. Maya waved enthusiastically as the convoy of black SUVs pulled away. Bye, Grandpa Thomas. Don't get lost again. Elena looked down at the business card in her hand. David Morrison, Executive Assistant, Sterling Enterprises. The Sterling name was familiar. Everyone in Seattle knew Sterling Enterprises. They owned half the commercial real estate downtown, had fingers in technology, hospitality, and manufacturing. It was the kind of massive corporation that Elena never imagined would intersect with her humble life. Mama, do you think Grandpa Thomas is really important? Maya asked as they began packing up the cart. I think he's important because he's a person, sweetheart, Elena replied, tucking the business card into her apron pocket without much thought. Everyone deserves kindness, no matter who they are. As they wheeled the cart back to their tiny apartment 6 blocks away, Elena had no idea that her simple act of compassion had just set in motion a chain of events that would transform her life completely. She was focused on more immediate concerns. Maya's school project that was due tomorrow, the rent that would be due next week, and the eternal question of how to stretch their modest income to cover all of life's necessities. Their apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old building that had seen better days. The elevator rarely worked, so Elena and Maya climbed the stairs together, Maya chattering about her day at school while Elena calculated tomorrow's shopping list in her head. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchenette barely large enough for 2 people. But it was home and it was theirs. Bath time, little one, Elena said as they entered their modest space. Then we'll work on that science project about plants. Can we call it, How Mama's Vegetables Grow Big and Strong? Maya giggled as she headed toward the bathroom. We can call it whatever you want, Elena laughed, following her daughter and already planning how to help with the project using materials they had on hand. As Maya splashed in the bathtub, Elena stood at their small window looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, in a mansion or penthouse she couldn't imagine, an old man named Thomas was probably being fussed over by worried family members. She hoped he was comfortable and safe. She hoped his confusion would clear up, at least enough for him to know he was loved. Elena had no way of knowing that at that very moment, 20 miles away in a glass tower overlooking Elliott Bay, Thomas Sterling's son Alexander was staring at David Morrison's report about the noodle vendor who had shown his father such unexpected kindness. She had no way of knowing that Alexander Sterling, CEO of one of the Pacific Northwest's most powerful companies, was already making plans to find her and thank her properly. And she certainly had no way of knowing that her 7-year relationship with Marcus Webb was about to implode in the most devastating way possible, leaving her exactly where Alexander Sterling would be able to find her. Heartbroken, homeless, and in desperate need of the kind of help that only someone with unlimited resources could provide. For now, Elena Chen was simply a hard-working single mother who had shown compassion to a stranger. By tomorrow, she would begin a journey that would reveal secrets about her past, test her strength in ways she never imagined, and ultimately lead her to a love she never dared to dream possible. But tonight, she was just a woman tucking her daughter into bed, reading a story about a princess who found her prince through kindness rather than magic, never suspecting that her own fairy tale was about to begin. Alexander Sterling stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office on the 42nd floor of Sterling Tower, his reflection ghost-like against the panoramic view of Seattle's skyline. Even at 8 in the morning, he cut an imposing figure. 6 feet 2 inches of controlled power wrapped in a custom-tailored Italian suit that cost more than most people made in a month. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jaw clean-shaven, and his gray eyes held the kind of focused intensity that had built Sterling Enterprises into a billion-dollar empire. But this morning, those gray eyes were clouded with worry and exhaustion. He hadn't slept properly in a week. Not since his father had wandered away from the family estate during one of his increasingly frequent periods of confusion. "Mr. Sterling." David Morrison's voice came through the intercom. "I have the report about your father. Come in." David entered carrying a tablet and a cup of coffee that Alexander wouldn't touch. In the 7 years David had worked as his executive assistant, he had learned that his boss ran on nervous energy and relentless drive during crisis situations, not caffeine. "We found him last night," David began without preamble, knowing Alexander preferred directness. "He was at a noodle cart downtown, near Pike Place Market." Alexander turned from the window, relief flooding his features for the first time in days. "Is he hurt? Where is he now?" "He's fine, sir. Dr. Hendricks examined him thoroughly. Dehydrated and tired but no injuries. He's resting at the estate now, with 2 nurses monitoring him around the clock." "How did he survive a week on the streets?" Alexander sank into his leather executive chair, suddenly feeling every one of his 32 years. "In his condition." "That's the interesting part," David continued, consulting his tablet. "According to your father, a young woman who runs a noodle cart had been feeding him. When we found him, he was eating what he described as the most delicious meal I've had in years. She charged him nothing, treated him with dignity." Alexander raised an eyebrow. His father's condition made him vulnerable to exploitation, and Alexander had learned to be suspicious of anyone who showed the Sterling family unusual kindness. "What does she want?" "Money. Publicity." "That's just it, sir. She doesn't seem to want anything. When I tried to give her my card, she actually resisted. Said it wasn't necessary." David pulled up a photo on his tablet. "Her name is Elena Chen. 27 years old, runs a street cart near Pike Place. Has a 6-year-old daughter." Alexander studied the photo. A young woman with kind eyes and a warm smile, standing behind a modest food cart. She was beautiful, but not in the polished way he was accustomed to. Her beauty was natural, unadorned, the kind that came from character rather than cosmetics. Her clothes were simple and practical, her hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. "Single mother?" he asked. "Lives with a partner, Marcus Webb. They're not married, but they've been together for 7 years. He works in one of our subsidiary factories. Webb Manufacturing. Low-level position." Alexander made a mental note. "I want to do something for her. A reward or..." He trailed off, an idea forming. "Actually, first I want to meet her myself. Arrange it. Shall I invite her to the office?" "No." Alexander was already strategizing. A woman like Elena Chen would probably be intimidated by Sterling Tower, by the corporate environment that was Alexander's natural habitat. I'll go to her. Tonight at her cart. David looked surprised. Alexander Sterling didn't do field work, didn't meet with ordinary citizens, didn't venture into the parts of Seattle where people like Elena Chen made their living. Sir, are you sure that's? My father is important to me, David. More important than you know. Alexander's voice carried a weight that his assistant didn't fully understand. This woman showed him kindness when she had no reason to, expected no reward. That means something. What David didn't know, what no one except Alexander and his father knew, was that Thomas Sterling's dementia was rapidly worsening. The doctors had given him 6 months, maybe a year, before the confusion became complete and permanent. Every moment of clarity was precious. Every connection to the world outside his failing mind was a gift to be treasured. And according to Thomas, this Elena Chen had somehow broken through the fog of his confusion, had made him feel human and cared for in a way that all the expensive medical care in the world couldn't match. There's something else, sir, David continued hesitantly. I did some background research on Ms. Chen. She's been saving money for years, apparently planning to buy a house with her partner. They're having some kind of celebration this weekend. A housewarming party. Good for her, Alexander said absently, already turning back to his computer. Set up the meeting for tonight. And David, I'll be going alone. As his assistant left, Alexander found himself studying Elena Chen's photo again. There was something about her face that nagged at him, a sense of familiarity he couldn't place. Had they met before? It seemed unlikely. He moved in circles far removed from noodle carts and street vendors. Yet something about her eyes, her smile, tugged at a memory he couldn't quite grasp. He shook his head and turned to the stack of contracts waiting for his attention. He had a company to run, deals to close, board meetings to dominate. But underneath his usual laser focus, a part of his mind kept returning to the woman who had shown his father such unexpected kindness. 20 miles away, Elena was experiencing what should have been one of the happiest weeks of her life. The house she and Marcus had been saving for was finally within reach. After 7 years of careful budgeting, of denying herself small luxuries so they could build a future together, the dream was becoming reality. The paperwork should be ready by Friday, Marcus told her over breakfast in their tiny kitchen. He was handsome in a conventional way. Average height, brown hair, the kind of bland good looks that didn't turn heads but didn't offend anyone either. Then we can have that housewarming party we've been talking about. Maya looked up from her cereal with excitement. Will I have my own room in the new house? Your very own room, princess, Marcus assured her, ruffling her hair in the casual way of someone who had been around since she was born. With space for all your toys and books. Elena smiled as she packed Maya's lunch for school, but something felt off about Marcus's behavior lately. He'd been distracted, taking phone calls in the other room, staying out late with what he claimed were work obligations. When she asked about it, he deflected with talk about the house, about their future, about how everything would be perfect once they were settled in their new life. Are you happy? She asked him as Maya gathered her school things. Of course I'm happy, he replied, but his eyes didn't meet hers. Why wouldn't I be? We're finally getting everything we've worked for. After Marcus left for work and Maya for school, Elena stood in their small apartment and tried to imagine leaving it behind. It wasn't much, but it had been their home for 5 years. Maya had taken her first steps in the narrow hallway, had learned to read curled up on the second-hand sofa by the window. The kitchen had seen countless meals shared, homework sessions, quiet conversations after Maya's bedtime. Still, Elena was excited about the house. It would mean stability for Maya, a good school district, a yard where her daughter could play safely. It would mean that all those years of sacrifice, all those long hours at the noodle cart, had been worth it. She had no way of knowing that the house deed was already being prepared, but not with her name on it. She had no way of knowing that Isabella Liu, daughter of one of Seattle's most successful restaurant chains, had been planning her engagement party for months. She had no way of knowing that Marcus Webb, the man she had loved and trusted for 7 years, the man who had helped raise her daughter, was about to betray her in the most devastating way imaginable. And she certainly had no idea that the elderly man she had fed the night before was about to change the course of her life in ways she could never have anticipated. Elena grabbed her keys and headed out to set up her cart for another day of honest work. She had noodles to prepare, customers to serve, and a future to build. If she had known what was coming, she might have spent that morning differently. She might have held Maya a little longer, might have taken a moment to appreciate the simple happiness of their modest life. Instead, she went to work, humming softly to herself as she prepared ingredients for the lunch rush, completely unaware that by the end of the week, everything she thought she knew about her life would be turned upside down. The only hint of the storm approaching came in the form of a business card tucked into her apron pocket, a card she had forgotten about, from a man named David Morrison who worked for Sterling Enterprises. A card that represented a connection to a world of wealth and power that Elena Chen had never imagined would intersect with her own. But storms, even devastating ones, sometimes clear the air for something better. And sometimes the destruction they bring makes room for a love story that could never have bloomed in the tidy, predictable life that came before. Alexander Sterling had not expected to feel nervous as David parked the unmarked sedan across from Elena Chen's noodle cart that evening. He made multimillion-dollar decisions daily without a second thought, had stared down corporate raiders and hostile takeovers with ice in his veins. But something about approaching this modest street vendor had his usual confidence slightly shaken. Perhaps it was because this meeting mattered in a way that business rarely did. This wasn't about profit margins or market share. This was about gratitude, about honoring someone who had shown genuine kindness to the most important person in his world. "Are you sure you don't want me to come with you, sir?" David asked from the driver's seat. "No. This needs to be personal." Alexander straightened his tie, then immediately loosened it again. Even in his most casual clothes, dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt, he looked expensive. Everything about him, from his Italian leather shoes to his Swiss watch, screamed wealth and privilege. He was about to approach a woman who earned her living serving noodles from a cart, and he needed to find a way to bridge that gap. The evening crowd around Pike Place Market was lighter than usual, mostly tourists and a few locals grabbing dinner on their way home from work. Elena's cart was positioned strategically near the corner, where the aroma of her cooking would draw attention from passers-by. Alexander could smell the rich, savory broth from 50 feet away, and his stomach reminded him that he hadn't eaten since breakfast. Elena looked up as he approached, and Alexander felt that same strange tug of familiarity he'd experienced when looking at her photo. She was even more beautiful in person. Not magazine beautiful, but genuinely lovely in a way that suggested she had no idea of her own attractiveness. "Good evening," he said, stopping at her counter. "I'd like to order, please." "Of course. What can I get you?" Her smile was warm and genuine, the same smile she'd probably given hundreds of customers. "The beef noodle soup is very popular, or if you prefer something lighter, the chicken and vegetable is excellent too." "Actually," Alexander said carefully, "I was hoping to talk to you about my father." Elena's expression shifted to polite confusion. "I'm sorry. Thomas Sterling. You helped him last night. Fed him when he was lost and confused." Alexander watched her face carefully. "I'm his son, Alexander." Recognition dawned in Elena's dark eyes, followed immediately by concern. "Oh, is he all right? He seemed so lost." "He's fine, thanks to you." Alexander found himself genuinely moved by her immediate concern for Thomas's welfare, rather than excitement about meeting a Sterling. "I wanted to thank you personally for your kindness, and to ask if there's anything I can do to repay you." Elena shook her head quickly. "That's really not necessary, Mr. Sterling." Alexander Sterling. If the name meant anything to her, she didn't show it. "Mr. Sterling, your father was hungry and I had food. It wasn't anything special. It was to him. And to me." Alexander pulled out an envelope from his jacket. "Please let me at least reimburse you for the meal, and maybe a little extra for your trouble." Elena waved the envelope away without even looking at it. I don't want money for helping someone. That's not why I did it. This response confirmed everything Alexander had hoped about her character, but it also presented a problem. He couldn't just walk away. His father had been specific about wanting to repay her kindness, and Alexander always honored his father's wishes. But Elena Chen clearly wasn't motivated by money, which eliminated his usual solutions. My father specifically asked me to find you, Alexander said, trying a different approach. He said you made him feel human again, treated him with dignity when he was vulnerable. That's not something we can put a price on, but it's also not something we can just forget. Elena was quiet for a moment, studying his face. Your father has dementia, doesn't he? The directness of the question caught Alexander off guard. How did you? My grandfather had it. I recognize the signs, the confusion mixed with moments of perfect clarity, the way he held onto small kindnesses like they were lifelines. Her expression softened. It's hard on families. Is he getting good care? The best money can buy, Alexander replied automatically, then caught himself. I mean, yes, he has excellent doctors, nurses, everything he needs. But not everything he wants, Elena observed gently. Money can't buy connection, can't buy the feeling that you still matter to the world. Alexander stared at her. In one simple observation, she had captured something that all his father's expensive medical team had missed. Thomas Sterling wasn't just deteriorating physically. He was losing his sense of purpose, his connection to life outside his failing mind. You're very perceptive, he said quietly. I've been there. It's heartbreaking to watch someone you love disappear bit by bit. Elena began cleaning her workspace, her movements efficient but thoughtful. How is he today? More clear? Actually, yes. Much more clear. He's been talking about you, about the meal you served him. It seems to have anchored him somehow. Elena paused in her cleaning. Would he like to come back sometime? I mean, if it helps him feel more connected to the world. He's welcome anytime. No charge, of course. Alexander felt something shift inside his chest. Here was a woman who barely scraped by financially, offering ongoing kindness to a stranger simply because it might help him feel less lost. You would do that? Of course. Everyone deserves to feel cared for. Before Alexander could respond, a small voice piped up from behind the cart. Mama, who's the man in the fancy clothes? Maya Chan emerged from where she'd been doing homework at a small table, her school bag slung over one shoulder. She looked at Alexander with the frank curiosity of a 6-year-old who hadn't yet learned to be intimidated by wealth or status. This is Mr. Sterling, sweetheart, Elena said. Remember Thomas, the elderly man from last night? This is his son. Oh! Maya's face lit up. Is Grandpa Thomas feeling better? We were worried about him. Alexander crouched down to Maya's eye level, something he'd never done with a child before. He's much better, thank you. He told me all about how kind you and your mother were to him. Mama says kindness is free, so there's never a reason not to give it away, Maya said solemnly. Is that why you came to thank us? Because you want to give some kindness back? The simple wisdom of the child's words hit Alexander harder than any business strategy or corporate philosophy ever had. Yes, he said after a moment. That's exactly why I came. Good. Maya beamed. Do you want to try Mama's noodles? They're the best in the whole city. Maybe the whole world. Alexander looked up at Elena, who was watching the interaction with a mixture of pride and amusement. I would love to try your mother's noodles. As Elena prepared his order, Alexander found himself studying the small family operation. Everything was spotlessly clean despite the modest equipment. Elena moved with practiced efficiency, but also with genuine care, tasting the broth, adjusting seasoning, adding small garnishes that elevated the simple meal into something approaching art. Here you go, she said, setting a bowl in front of him. Be careful, it's hot. Alexander took his first bite and understood immediately why his father had been so moved. The broth was rich and complex, the noodles perfectly cooked, the vegetables bright and fresh. But beyond the technical excellence, there was something else. Warmth, care, the indefinable quality that comes when food is prepared with love. "This is incredible," he said honestly. "How did you learn to cook like this?" "My grandmother taught me. She always said that cooking was about nourishing souls, not just bodies." Elena smiled at the memory. "I like to think she would have approved of me helping your father." As Alexander ate, Maya chattered about school, her friends, her excitement about moving to a new house. Elena listened with the kind of focused attention that suggested Maya was the most important person in her world. Watching them together, Alexander felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of what real family might look like. His own childhood had been privileged but lonely. Private schools, exclusive clubs, summers at the family estate. His mother had died when he was 12, and his father, while loving, had been consumed with building the business empire that would someday pass to Alexander. There had been staff instead of family dinners, boarding school instead of bedtime stories, corporate events instead of casual conversations. But here, at a modest noodle cart on a Seattle street corner, was the kind of warmth and connection he'd always wondered about but never experienced. "I should pay for this," Alexander said, reaching for his wallet as he finished the last of the noodles. $8, Elena said. Alexander looked at her in surprise. The meal he'd just eaten was restaurant quality. He'd paid 3 times that much for inferior food at some of Seattle's most exclusive establishments. "Are you sure? This is worth much more than $8, Elena repeated firmly. "I don't price according to what people can afford to pay. I price according to what's fair." Alexander handed her a $10 bill, and when she started to make change, he waved it away. "Keep it. For exceptional service." "Thank you." Elena smiled as she cleaned up around him. "Will you tell your father that he's welcome back anytime? Bring him by when he's feeling up to it." "I will." Alexander stood to leave, then hesitated. "Elena, may I call you Elena? My offer stands. If there's ever anything you need, anything I can do to repay your kindness." "I'll remember that," she said, though something in her tone suggested she never intended to call in such a favor. As Alexander walked back to where David was waiting in the car, he found himself planning his father's next visit to Elena's cart. Thomas had been more animated talking about his encounter with her than Alexander had seen him in months. If spending time with Elena Chen could give his father more moments of clarity, more connection to the world, then Alexander would make sure it happened regularly. He had no way of knowing that within days, Elena's entire world would collapse. He had no way of knowing that the modest, self-sufficient woman who had just refused his money would soon be in desperate need of exactly the kind of help he could provide. And he certainly had no way of knowing that the strange sense of familiarity he felt when looking at her was about to become much more significant than a simple case of mistaken identity. For now, Alexander Sterling drove back to his mansion thinking about warm broth and warmer smiles, about a little girl who believed kindness was free and a woman who embodied that philosophy in everything she did. In a few days, when Elena's world fell apart, he would remember this evening and realize that sometimes the universe provides exactly what we need, exactly when we need it most. But first, Elena would have to lose everything she thought mattered, so she could discover what actually did. The day Elena Chen's world fell apart began like any other. She woke before dawn to prepare ingredients for her noodle cart, made breakfast for Maya, and sent her daughter off to school with a kiss and a reminder to pay attention in math class. Marcus had already left for work, claiming an early meeting, so Elena enjoyed the quiet morning ritual alone with her thoughts. Today felt different though. Special. Tonight would be their housewarming party, the celebration of 7 years of sacrifice and saving. Elena had invited their neighbors, Marcus's co-workers, the other vendors from Pike Place Market, anyone who had been part of their journey toward this moment. She hummed as she prepared her ingredients, mentally reviewing the party preparations. The new house was modest by Seattle standards but palatial compared to their tiny apartment. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, A real kitchen where Maya could do homework while Elena cooked dinner. A backyard where they could plant a garden, maybe get Maya the puppy she'd been requesting for years. Everything was perfect. Too perfect, as Elena would soon learn. The first sign that something was wrong came at lunch. Isabella Liu, a woman Elena vaguely recognized as the daughter of a local restaurant chain owner, appeared at her cart with two friends, all dressed in expensive clothes that seemed out of place in the casual Pike Place market atmosphere. "2 bowls of your cheapest noodles," Isabella said, her tone suggesting she was doing Elena a favor by even acknowledging her existence. Elena served the order efficiently, noting that Isabella barely touched her food. Instead, she seemed more interested in studying Elena herself, making comments to her friends that were just quiet enough to be indecipherable but loud enough to be clearly unfriendly. "Strange place to eat lunch," one of Isabella's companions observed. "Don't your family's restaurants serve better food than this?" "Oh, we're not here for the food," Isabella replied, her eyes never leaving Elena's face. "I just wanted to see something for myself." Elena tried to ignore the odd interaction and focus on her other customers, but Isabella's presence left her unsettled. There had been something almost predatory in the woman's gaze, as if Elena were being evaluated rather than served. The second sign came when Marcus arrived home that evening, an hour before their party was scheduled to begin. Elena was rushing around their apartment, trying to change clothes and finalize last-minute details, when he walked in carrying a bottle of expensive champagne. "Where did that come from?" Elena asked, eyeing the bottle that probably cost more than her weekly grocery budget. "Gift from my supervisor," Marcus said quickly. "To celebrate the promotion and the new house." "What promotion?" Elena paused in her preparations. "You didn't mention any promotion." Marcus's face flushed slightly. "It just got confirmed today. I wanted to surprise you. Deputy manager position, significant raise. Everything's coming together for us, Elena. Everything." He kissed her cheek, but something about the gesture felt performative rather than genuine. Elena pushed down her unease and focused on getting ready. She had one nice dress, a simple black number she'd bought for their anniversary 3 years ago, and she'd splurged on getting her hair done at a local salon that afternoon. Tonight was supposed to be their celebration, the culmination of everything they'd worked toward. By 7 o'clock, their new house was filled with people. Elena moved through the rooms with pride, accepting congratulations and compliments on their new home. The house felt surreal after so many years in their cramped apartment. All this space, all these possibilities. Maya was in her element, showing anyone who would listen to her new bedroom, complete with the princess bed set Elena had saved for months to buy. Watching her daughter's joy, Elena felt a deep satisfaction. This was what all the long hours and financial sacrifice had been for. Maya's future, her security, her happiness. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus called out around 8 o'clock, tapping a knife against his champagne glass to get everyone's attention. "If I could have your attention, please." The crowd quieted, turning toward where Marcus stood on the small staircase leading to the second floor. He looked handsome and confident, every inch the successful man celebrating his achievements. Elena smiled up at him from the living room, her heart full of pride and love. "First, I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," Marcus began, his voice carrying easily through the house. "This is a special day for many reasons. We're not just celebrating a new home, we're celebrating new beginnings, new opportunities, and new chapters in our lives." Elena felt a flutter of happiness. This was the moment she dreamed about. Marcus publicly acknowledging their partnership, their shared achievement, their future together. "I've been blessed to have some incredible people in my life," Marcus continued. "People who have supported me, believed in me, and helped me become the man I am today. And tonight, I want to honor someone very special." Elena's cheeks warmed as she anticipated his words of appreciation. Around her, neighbors and friends smiled knowingly, clearly expecting Marcus to praise his longtime partner. 7 years ago, I thought my life would follow a predictable path. But then I met someone who changed everything. Someone who opened my eyes to what I really wanted, what I really deserved." Marcus's smile broadened as he looked out over the crowd. She showed me that I didn't have to settle, that I could reach for something bigger, something better. Elena's smile began to falter as something in Marcus's tone registered as wrong. He wasn't looking at her. His eyes were scanning the crowd, but not landing on her face. This woman taught me about ambition, about class, about what it means to be part of something important. She believed in my potential when I barely believed in it myself. Marcus raised his champagne glass. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet the woman I'm going to marry, Isabella Liu. The sound that came from Elena's throat was barely human. A gasp, a whimper, a sound of such pure shock that several people near her turned in concern. But she barely noticed their stares because Isabella Liu was stepping forward from the crowd, radiant in a designer dress, reaching for Marcus's outstretched hand. Marcus proposed to me last week, Isabella announced, her voice clear and confident. And I'm thrilled to become Mrs. Webb. We wanted to share our happiness with all of you, especially at this wonderful housewarming party. The applause that followed seemed to come from very far away. Elena stood frozen in place, watching the man she had loved for 7 years, the man who had helped raise her daughter, the man she had saved money with and planned a future with, embrace another woman in front of all their friends and neighbors. Elena! Mrs. Patterson from next door touched her arm gently. Elena dear, are you all right? Elena couldn't answer, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what she was seeing. This had to be some kind of horrible joke, some kind of misunderstanding. Marcus wouldn't do this to her. Not like this. Not in front of everyone. But as she watched Isabella show off an enormous engagement ring to the crowd of guests, reality began to crash over her in waves. The strange behavior, the secretive phone calls, the new clothes, the promotion she'd never heard about. It all made sense now. Mama! Maya appeared at her side, her small face confused and frightened. Mama, why is Uncle Marcus kissing that lady? Why is everyone clapping? Elena forced herself to move, to breathe, to function. She had to get Maya out of here before the child understood what was happening. Before the humiliation became complete. We need to go, sweetheart, Elena managed, her voice surprisingly steady. Right now. But this is our party. Now, Maya. Elena pushed through the crowd toward the front door. Her daughter's hand clutched tightly in hers. But before they could escape, Marcus's voice called out behind them. Elena! Wait. She turned slowly, and the last vestiges of hope in her heart crumbled at the expression on his face. Not guilt. Not remorse. Annoyance. You don't have to leave, he said, approaching her with Isabella still clinging to his arm. I know this is unexpected. But we can be mature about this. Mature. Elena's voice came out as a whisper. Marcus, what are you talking about? This is our house. Party. Our. Actually, Isabella interrupted smoothly. This is my house. My name is on the deed. Marcus gave it to me as an engagement present. Elena stared at her. What? The house you thought you were buying? Isabella smiled, but it wasn't kind. Marcus used your down payment money to secure it, but the title is in my name. A lovely gesture from my fiancé. That's impossible. Elena turned to Marcus, desperate for him to deny it. Tell her she's wrong. Tell her this is our house. Marcus had the decency to look uncomfortable, but his voice was steady when he spoke. Elena, be realistic. You work at a noodle cart. Isabella's family owns 12 restaurants. She can provide the kind of life I've always wanted, the kind of opportunities one deserve. The kind of life you've always wanted. Elena's voice was getting stronger, fed by growing anger. What about the life we planned together? What about Maya? You've been her father figure since she was born. And I've been good to her, Marcus replied defensively. But she's not my responsibility. She's not my daughter. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. Behind her, she could hear the party continuing, could hear Isabella accepting congratulations from guests who had no idea they were witnessing a woman's complete devastation. 7 years, Elena said quietly. 7 years of my life. 7 years of saving every penny, of working 14-hour days, of believing in us. And now you're free to find someone more suitable to your situation, Isabella said with false kindness. Someone who won't expect quite so much. Elena looked around at the house she had thought was hers, at the guests who were pretending not to stare, at the man who had just destroyed her world with casual cruelty. Maya was crying now, though Elena wasn't sure her daughter understood exactly what was happening. You used me, Elena said to Marcus. All these years you used me. I cared about you, he replied, but his tone suggested he was already tired of the conversation. But people grow, Elena. They change. They want different things. Get out, Isabella said suddenly, her voice sharp. Both of you. This is my house now, and I don't want you here. Gladly, Elena replied, her dignity finally reasserting itself. She scooped Maya into her arms and headed for the door, but Marcus caught her arm. Elena, don't be dramatic. We can work something out. Maybe you can stay in the apartment until you find something else. Don't touch me. Elena's voice was ice. Don't ever touch me again. She pushed past him and out the front door, Maya sobbing against her shoulder. Behind them, the party continued as if nothing had happened. As if a woman hadn't just lost everything she thought mattered in the space of 10 minutes. Elena's car, their car, she realized with bitter irony, probably also legally belonging to Isabella now, was parked in the driveway. She strapped Maya into her car seat with shaking hands, her daughter's questions becoming more urgent. Mama, I don't understand. Why can't we go back to our house? Where are we going to sleep? Elena closed her eyes, leaning against the car as the magnitude of their situation hit her. No house. No savings. Marcus had clearly used her money for Isabella's benefit. No plan, no backup, nowhere to go. She pulled out her phone to call. Who? She had no family in Seattle, no close friends outside of their shared social circle. The vendors at Pike Place Market were friendly but not close enough for this kind of emergency. She had spent 7 years building a life around Marcus, and now that he was gone, she realized how isolated that life had made her. Mama! Maya's voice was small and scared. Are we going to be okay? Elena opened her eyes and looked at her daughter through the car window. This beautiful, innocent child who had just watched her world fall apart and still trusted her mother to fix it somehow. Yes, baby, Elena said firmly, making a decision. We're going to be okay. We're going to be better than okay. She didn't know how yet. She didn't know where they would sleep tonight or how she would rebuild their lives from nothing. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She and Maya were worth more than Marcus Webb had ever deserved. They would survive this. They would thrive. Elena started the car and pulled away from the house that had never really been theirs, driving into an uncertain future with her daughter's sobs gradually quieting in the back seat. She had no way of knowing that Alexander Sterling was at that very moment trying to reach David Morrison with questions about Elena Chen. She had no way of knowing that her simple act of kindness to an elderly stranger was about to become the lifeline she desperately needed. But sometimes the universe works in mysterious ways. Sometimes the kindness we show comes back to us exactly when we need it most. And sometimes the worst betrayals clear the path for the greatest love stories of our lives. Elena Chen was about to discover that losing everything she thought she wanted was the first step toward finding everything she actually needed. Elena drove aimlessly through Seattle's nighttime streets for over an hour before admitting to herself that she had nowhere to go. Maya had finally fallen asleep in her car seat, exhausted from crying, and Elena was grateful for the temporary quiet that let her think. The obvious choice was a motel, but a quick calculation of her available cash revealed the harsh reality of her situation. She had exactly $43 in her wallet and maybe another $100 in their joint checking account, if Marcus hadn't already cleaned that out too. Not enough for even a few nights in the cheapest accommodations, especially not when she needed to save money for food and gas to keep her noodle cart running. The noodle cart. At least she still had her business, her means of earning a living. The cart was registered in her name, and all the equipment was paid for. It wasn't much, but it was something. a foundation she could build from. Elena pulled into an empty parking lot near the waterfront and called the one person she thought might help, Rosa Martinez, who ran a taco truck 3 blocks from Elena's usual spot. They weren't close friends, but they looked out for each other in the way that small business owners do. Elena, Slate Media. Is everything okay? Rosa, I need a huge favor. Elena's voice was steadier than she'd expected. Could Maya and I sleep in your truck tonight? Just tonight, I promise. I'll explain everything tomorrow. There was a pause. Then Rosa's voice came back warm with concern. Of course. Bring Maya over. And Elena. Whatever happened, we'll figure it out. 20 minutes later, Elena was settling Maya onto a makeshift bed in the back of Rosa's taco truck, while Rosa heated up leftover carnitas for an impromptu late dinner. That bastard, Rosa said quietly when Elena finished explaining what had happened. 7 years and he pulls this. In front of everyone. I should have seen it coming, Elena replied, watching Maya sleep. All those late nights, the secret of phone calls. I was so focused on our future that I missed what was happening right in front of me. Don't you dare blame yourself, Rosa said fiercely. He's the one who chose to lie, chose to cheat. You trusted someone you loved. That's not a character flaw, it's what good people do. Elena felt tears threatening again but pushed them back. She'd cried enough for one night. I don't know what I'm going to do, Rosa. I don't have anywhere to live. Barely any money. You'll figure it out, Rosa assured her. You're stronger than you think. And you're not alone. The vendor community looks out for each other. Elena appreciated Rosa's kindness, but she knew the other vendors had their own struggles. She couldn't rely on their charity for long. As she finally drifted off to sleep on the narrow bench beside her daughter, Elena's mind was already working on practical problems. Finding an apartment they could afford, figuring out childcare for Maya, maybe taking on additional catering jobs to supplement the cart's income. She had no way of knowing that less than a mile away, Alexander Sterling was pacing the floors of his penthouse, worried because Thomas had been asking about the kind noodle lady all evening. She had no idea that Alexander had tried to call David Morrison twice to ask about Elena Chen's address, thinking his father might enjoy a visit from the woman who had made such an impression on him. If Elena had known, she might have felt a flicker of hope. Instead, she fell asleep planning a future built entirely on her own resources, never imagining that help was already looking for her. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The next morning brought new challenges and unexpected encounters. Elena woke early as always to set up her cart for the breakfast rush. Rosa had insisted on watching Maya while she slept, allowing Elena to focus on work without worrying about childcare. The routine of preparing ingredients, heating broth, and arranging her mobile workspace was comforting in its familiarity. This at least hadn't changed. Elena Chen might not have a home or a partner anymore, but she was still one of the best noodle vendors in Seattle. She was just opening for business when a black sedan pulled up across the street. Elena recognized it immediately. It was the same car that had picked up Thomas Sterling 2 nights ago. Sure enough, David Morrison emerged from the passenger side and approached her cart with his usual professional demeanor. Ms. Chen. Good morning. I hope I'm not disturbing your work. Not at all, Elena replied, though she felt a flutter of nervousness. Is everything all right with Thomas? Actually, that's why I'm here. David pulled out his phone and showed her a photo. Mr. Sterling has been asking about you constantly. He seems to have formed quite an attachment, and his doctors think regular social interaction might be beneficial for his condition. Elena looked at the photo. Thomas Sterling sitting in what appeared to be a medical facility, looking lost and confused. Her heart went out to him immediately. Of course I'd be happy to see him again. You can bring him by the cart anytime. Actually, I was wondering if you might consider visiting him instead. The Sterling estate has full medical facilities, and it would be easier to control the environment for someone with his condition. The Sterling estate. Elena had never been to anything that could properly be called an estate. I'm not sure that's appropriate, Mr. Morrison. I'm just a street vendor. I don't think I'd fit in. Mr. Sterling specifically requested it, David interrupted gently. And his son, Alexander, is very grateful for your kindness. He'd like to meet you properly, thank you in person. Elena hesitated. She had more pressing concerns than social visits, like finding somewhere for her and Maya to live. But something about Thomas Sterling's confused, gentle face in the photo tugged at her heart. Could I bring my daughter? She asked. I don't have childcare arrangements right now. Of course. Mr. Sterling mentioned how much he enjoyed meeting her. As Elena considered the invitation, she became aware of someone watching her. Isabella Liu stood across the street, partially hidden behind a parked car but clearly observing Elena's conversation with David. The sight of her former rival sent a chill down Elena's spine, but she forced herself to ignore Isabella's presence. All right, Elena decided. When would be convenient? This afternoon. Say 2 o'clock. I can send a car. Elena nodded, already planning how to rearrange her work schedule. A visit to the Sterling estate might be exactly the distraction she and Maya needed, a chance to focus on someone else's troubles instead of their own overwhelming problems. After David left, Elena threw herself into work with renewed energy. The lunch rush was particularly busy, and she was grateful for the steady stream of customers that kept her mind occupied. She was just cleaning up when Maya appeared, having walked over from Rosa's truck with a coloring book under her arm. Mama, Rosa says we might visit a big house today? That's right, sweetheart. Remember Thomas, the elderly gentleman we helped? We're going to visit him. Maya's face lit up. Is he still sad and confused? Probably, Elena admitted. That's why we're visiting, to help him feel less lonely. As they prepared to leave for the afternoon, Elena caught sight of Isabella again, this time with Marcus and another woman, pointing in her direction. The trio was too far away for Elena to hear their conversation, but their body language suggested they were discussing her situation with something between amusement and satisfaction. Elena felt a flash of anger but pushed it aside. She had more important things to focus on than Marcus and his new life. She had a daughter to raise, a business to run, and an elderly man to visit who needed kindness more than judgment. The car that arrived to pick them up was understated but elegant, expensive without being ostentatious. The driver was polite and professional, treating Elena with the same courtesy he would show any passenger. As they drove through Seattle's affluent neighborhoods toward the Sterling estate, Maya pressed her face to the window in wonder. Look at all the big houses, Mama. Do rich people really live in all of them? Some rich people, Elena replied carefully. But having money doesn't automatically make someone happy, sweetheart. Remember that. The Sterling estate was even more impressive than Elena had imagined. Set on several acres overlooking Puget Sound, the main house was a masterpiece of Pacific Northwest architecture. All natural stone and weathered cedar, glass walls that brought the outdoors inside. Gardens and walkways wound through the property, leading to what appeared to be a separate guest house and medical facility. Mama, Maya whispered as they walked toward the front door. This is like a castle. Elena squeezed her daughter's hand reassuringly, though she felt intimidated herself. This level of wealth was so far beyond her experience that she wasn't sure how to navigate it. But then she remembered Thomas Sterling eating her noodles with tears in his eyes, and her purpose became clear again. Wealth might be foreign to her, but compassion was universal. David Morrison met them at the door and led them through a foyer that was larger than Elena's entire former apartment. Despite the house's grandeur, Elena noticed it felt somehow cold, more like a museum than a home. Beautiful but impersonal, as if no one actually lived there. Thomas is in the sunroom, David explained as they walked through corridors lined with expensive art. He's been looking forward to this all day. The sunroom was a different world entirely. Warm, filled with plants and comfortable furniture, overlooking the estate's gardens. Thomas Sterling sat in a leather armchair by the windows, and his face transformed when he saw Elena and Maya enter. "My dear girl," he exclaimed, rising with more energy than Elena had seen from him before. "And sweet Maya, you came to visit an old man." "Of course we came," Elena replied, accepting his enthusiastic hug. How are you feeling, Thomas? Much better now that you're here. His eyes were clearer today, more focused. I've been telling everyone about your wonderful noodles. Alex thinks I'm imagining things. He can't believe street food could be so delicious. Alex? Lena asked. My son. He's around here somewhere, probably locked in his office working. That boy doesn't know how to relax. Thomas turned to Maya with delight. And how are you, young lady? Did you bring more coloring books? As Maya chatted with Thomas about her artwork, Elena found herself relaxing for the first time in days. This felt natural, comfortable, just one person caring about another, regardless of their respective circumstances. He's been different since meeting you, a voice said behind her. Elena turned to find Alexander Sterling in the doorway, but he looked different than he had at her cart. Gone was the casual attire. Today he wore an expensive suit that emphasized his height and broad shoulders. His gray eyes were studying her with an intensity that made her self-conscious. Different how? Lena asked. More present, more engaged with the world. Alexander stepped into the sunroom, his presence immediately commanding attention. His doctors say interaction with new people can be beneficial, but I've never seen him respond to anyone the way he responds to you. Elena watched Thomas showing Maya his collection of crystals on the windowsill, both of them absorbed in the simple pleasure of each other's company. He's a lovely man. It's no trouble to spend time with him. It is for most people, Alexander said quietly. They find dementia uncomfortable, unpredictable. They don't know how to connect with someone whose mind is fragmented. Elena looked at him sharply. Your father isn't his disease, Mr. Sterling. He's still himself underneath the confusion. He still has feelings, still needs to feel valued and cared about. Alexander was quiet for a moment, studying her face. You speak like someone with experience. My grandfather. I watched him disappear bit by bit over 5 years. Elena's voice softened with memory. But every day there were still moments of connection, still glimpses of the man he used to be. Those moments were precious. And when the moments stopped coming, then I learned that love isn't conditional on someone being who they used to be. It's about caring for who they are right now, in this moment. Alexander stared at her with something like amazement. You're remarkable, you know that? Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. I'm just ordinary, Mr. Sterling. Anyone would. No, he interrupted firmly. Anyone wouldn't. Trust me, I've met a lot of people, Elena. Most of them are concerned primarily with what they can get from a situation. You seem concerned with what you can give. Before Elena could respond, Thomas called out from across the room. Alex, come meet my friend Elena properly. And Maya's been telling me about her school. Apparently she's the best reader in her class. As Alexander joined them by the windows, Elena found herself observing the family dynamic. Thomas was clearly devoted to his son, and Alexander's concern for his father was genuine. But there was a distance between them, a formality that spoke of years of living separate lives despite sharing the same house. Maya's very bright, Elena agreed, smoothing her daughter's hair. She wants to be a teacher when she grows up. Says she likes helping people learn new things. A noble profession, Alexander said, crouching down to Maya's level with surprising grace. What's your favorite subject to learn about? Everything, Maya replied enthusiastically. But especially stories. Mama reads to me every night, and we make up our own stories too. What kind of stories do you make up? Usually about brave girls who help people. Mama says the best stories are about people being kind to each other. Alexander glanced up at Elena. Your mother sounds very wise. They spent the next hour in comfortable conversation, Thomas growing more animated by the minute. Elena found herself genuinely enjoying Alexander's company. He was intelligent and thoughtful, asking perceptive questions about her work, her life, her perspective on the world. There was none of the condescension she might have expected from someone of his wealth and status. But as the afternoon wore on, Elena began to feel the weight of her circumstances pressing down on her again. This was a lovely interlude, but it was temporary. Soon she would have to return to the real world, to the problem of finding somewhere for her and Maya to sleep tonight. "Is everything all right?" Alexander asked quietly, apparently noticing her growing distraction. "You seem troubled." Elena hesitated. She barely knew this man, despite the easy conversation. It would be inappropriate to burden him with her personal problems. "I'm fine. Just tired." But Thomas, with the intuition that sometimes accompanies cognitive decline, picked up on the undercurrent. "My dear, you look sad. Has something upset you?" "I'm not sad, Thomas. Just thinking about some changes in my life." "What kind of changes?" Alexander asked, his attention fully focused on her now. Elena found herself in an impossible position. She couldn't lie to Thomas, whose direct questions demanded honest answers. But she also couldn't explain her situation without sounding like she was asking for help. "Mama and I are moving," Maya announced helpfully. "Uncle Marcus doesn't want to live with us anymore." The silence that followed was heavy with unasked questions. Elena felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment, but Alexander's expression showed only concern. "Moving can be stressful," he said carefully. "Do you have somewhere in mind?" "We're still figuring it out," Elena replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Thomas, despite his confusion about many things, seemed to understand perfectly what wasn't being said. "Alex, this won't do. Elena is family now. She's been kinder to me than people I've known for decades. We can't have her and Maya uncertain about where they'll live." "Dad," Alexander began, but Thomas was already continuing. "The guest house," he said decisively. "It's been empty for months, fully furnished. Elena and Maya should stay there while they figure out their next steps." Elena felt panic rise in her throat. "Thomas, that's incredibly generous, but I couldn't possibly." "Why not?" Thomas demanded with surprising sharpness. "It's just sitting empty, and you need somewhere safe for your daughter." "What's complicated about that?" Elena looked helplessly at Alexander, who was studying the situation with obvious calculation. "Mr. Sterling, your father is very kind, but I couldn't accept such generosity. I barely know your family." "You know us well enough to care about my father's well-being," Alexander interrupted. "And he's right, the guest house is empty. It seems like a practical solution to a temporary problem. But I can't pay." "Did anyone ask you to?" Thomas interjected impatiently. "Elena, dear, sometimes accepting help is just as important as offering it. Let us help you." Elena felt tears threatening again, but this time they were tears of relief rather than despair. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Maya piped up hopefully. "Can we really stay in the castle, Mama?" Alexander smiled at her daughter's enthusiasm. "It's not a castle, but it has a nice view of the water. Would you like to see it?" As they walked across the estate's grounds toward the guest house, Elena felt as if she were living in someone else's life. 24 hours ago, she'd been preparing for her housewarming party, planning a future with Marcus. Now she was being offered refuge by people who had been strangers 3 days ago. The guest house was beautiful, smaller than the main residence but still far more elegant than anywhere Elena had ever lived. 2 bedrooms, a full kitchen, a living room with windows overlooking the sound. Maya ran from room to room in delight while Elena stood in the doorway, overwhelmed. "This is too much," she said quietly to Alexander. "I can't accept this." "You can and you will," he replied firmly. "My father's happiness is worth more to me than you can possibly imagine. If having you nearby makes his remaining time more comfortable, then everyone benefits." Elena looked at him sharply. "Remaining time." Alexander's expression grew somber. "His condition is deteriorating rapidly. The doctors estimate 6 months, maybe less, before the confusion becomes complete. Every day of clarity is precious." Understanding dawned. This wasn't just charity, it was an investment in Thomas Sterling's quality of life. Elena could accept that. She could be useful, could earn her place here by providing companionship to a lonely elderly man. "All right," she said finally. "But only temporarily, while I save money for our own place. And I insist on helping around the house, cooking meals, whatever you need." "Deal," Alexander agreed quickly, as if he'd been afraid she might change her mind. As they shook hands, Elena felt a strange jolt of electricity at the contact. She looked up to find Alexander watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. For a moment, the air between them seemed charged with possibility. Then Maya came running back with questions about whether she could feed the ducks she'd seen on the pond, and the moment passed. But as Elena settled her daughter into their temporary new home that evening, she couldn't shake the memory of Alexander Sterling's gray eyes studying her as if she were a puzzle he was determined to solve. She had no way of knowing that Alexander was, at that very moment, instructing David Morrison to research Marcus Webb's employment history. She had no idea that within days, her entire understanding of her past would be turned upside down, revealing secrets that would explain the strange sense of familiarity she felt whenever Alexander looked at her. For now, Elena Chen was simply grateful for a safe place to sleep and a chance to rebuild her life. But she was about to discover that sometimes refuge becomes so much more than temporary shelter. Sometimes it becomes the place where you find not just safety but love. Elena woke in the guest house for the first time to the sound of Maya's delighted laughter. Through the bedroom window, she could see her daughter running through the estate's gardens, chasing butterflies while Thomas Sterling watched from a bench, his face bright with amusement. The sight filled Elena with warmth, but also with a growing sense of unease about their situation. The Sterling estate was beautiful, the guest house more comfortable than anywhere she'd ever lived, but Elena couldn't shake the feeling that she was living in a fairy tale that would inevitably end. She was making breakfast when Alexander appeared at the guest house door, dressed for work in another impeccably tailored suit. Through the window, he looked like a magazine advertisement for success, tall, confident, devastatingly handsome. Elena suddenly became aware that she was still in her pajamas, her hair uncombed. "I'm sorry," she said, opening the door but staying partially hidden behind it. "I wasn't expecting." "I should have called first," Alexander replied, his eyes taking in what he could see of her appearance with obvious appreciation. "I wanted to make sure you and Maya were settled comfortably." "Very comfortably, thank you. This place is incredible." Elena gestured toward the kitchen. "I was just making breakfast. Would you like some coffee?" "I'd love some if it's not too much trouble." As Alexander entered the guest house, Elena was acutely aware of how domestic the scene must appear. Her in pajamas making breakfast, Maya visible through the window playing in the garden like she belonged there. It felt dangerously like playing house with a man she barely knew. "It can be lonely too," Alexander said quietly, watching Maya through the window. "This house is too big for just two people, especially when one of them is often confused about where he is." Elena heard something in his voice, loneliness perhaps, or resignation. "It must be hard watching your father's condition worsen." "It is. But having you and Maya here." Alexander paused, seeming to search for words. "Yesterday was the most present I've seen him in months." He was himself again, at least for a few hours. Elena set a cup of coffee in front of him, their fingers brushing as he reached for it. Again she felt that strange jolt of awareness, that sense of connection that went beyond ordinary attraction. "I should go get dressed," she said, suddenly self-conscious. "Maya and I will come up to the main house later to visit with Thomas. Actually, I was hoping I could ask you a favor." Alexander's expression grew serious. "I have meetings all day, but my father has been asking about you constantly. Would you consider spending the day with him? I could arrange for someone to watch Maya if—" "Maya can come with me," Elena interrupted. "She enjoys Thomas's company as much as he enjoys hers." "Are you sure? I know you have your own work to think about." Elena had been dreading this conversation. "Actually, I'll need to figure out a new arrangement for the cart. I can't leave Maya alone while I work, and I can't afford childcare." She took a breath. I might need to sell it and find something else. Maybe restaurant work, something with more regular hours. Alexander was quiet for a moment, and Elena could practically see his mind working. What if there was another option? What do you mean? Sterling Enterprises owns several restaurants, a catering company, food service for corporate events. Someone with your culinary skills could probably find a position that would pay better than the cart and offer more stability. Elena felt a flush of pride and embarrassment in equal measure. I appreciate the thought, but I wouldn't want anyone to think I was taking advantage of your family's kindness. Elena. Alexander's voice was gentle but firm. You have a gift for cooking, and my father lights up when he's around you. If I can solve both of those problems with one solution, why wouldn't I? Before Elena could respond, Maya came bursting through the door, her cheeks flushed from running. Mama, Grandpa Thomas says there are fish in the pond, and maybe we can feed them after breakfast. Can we? Please. Of course, sweetheart, Elena replied, grateful for the interruption. The conversation with Alexander had been moving into territory that made her uncomfortable, accepting too much help, becoming too dependent on his family's generosity. Alexander stood to leave, checking his expensive watch. I should let you get ready for your day. But Elena, please think about what I said. There's no shame in accepting help when it benefits everyone involved. After he left, Elena found herself staring at her reflection in the guest house's bathroom mirror. Who was she becoming? 3 days ago, she'd been an independent single mother with a clear plan for her future. Now she was living in a mansion's guest house, having breakfast conversations with a billionaire CEO, and considering job offers that felt dangerously close to charity. But then Maya called out from the kitchen, Mama, should we make extra pancakes for Grandpa Thomas? And Elena remembered what mattered most. Her pride was a luxury she couldn't afford when her daughter's security was at stake. An hour later, Elena and Maya made their way to the main house, carrying a plate of Elena's homemade pancakes. Thomas was waiting in the sunroom, dressed in a cardigan and slacks that made him look more like the distinguished businessman he'd once been. My dear girls, he exclaimed as they entered. I was hoping you'd visit early today. I have so much to show Maya. As Maya settled beside Thomas to examine his collection of antique books, Elena found herself studying the old man's face. In the morning light, with his mind clear and focused, she could see the resemblance to Alexander. The same strong jawline, the same intelligent eyes. But where Alexander's expression was often guarded and controlled, Thomas's face showed every emotion openly. Elena, Thomas said suddenly, looking up from a book he was showing Maya. May I ask you something personal? Of course. The man who hurt you, this Marcus. How long were you together? Elena felt her cheeks warm. 7 years. Since Maya was a baby. Thomas's expression darkened. 7 years, and he threw you away like garbage for someone with more money? Thomas. No, my dear, let me finish. The old man's voice carried echoes of the authority he must have wielded in his business days. I've known men like that my entire life. Men who mistake wealth for worth, who think success is measured by what they can acquire rather than what they can build. Elena glanced at Maya, who was absorbed in a picture book and not paying attention to the adult conversation. He wasn't always like that. Or maybe he was, and I just didn't see it. You saw what he wanted you to see, Thomas said gently. But his true character showed eventually, didn't it? When he had something to gain by showing it. The insight was uncomfortably accurate. Elena had spent the past 2 days blaming herself for missing the signs, for being naive enough to trust Marcus completely. But Thomas was right. Marcus had deliberately hidden his true nature until revealing it served his purposes. The question now, Thomas continued, is what you're going to do with this knowledge. Are you going to let his betrayal make you cynical? Or are you going to use it to recognize real integrity when you see it? Before Elena could ask what he meant by that, the sound of multiple vehicles arriving in the estate's driveway interrupted their conversation. Through the sunroom windows, Elena could see several black SUVs and a police car pulling up to the main house. What's happening? Elena asked, But Thomas looked as confused as she felt. David Morrison appeared in the sunroom doorway, his usual composure slightly rattled. "Mr. Sterling, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's been a development regarding Ms. Chen's situation." Elena felt her stomach drop. "What kind of development?" "There are some people here who need to speak with you. Police officers and others." Elena's mind immediately went to the worst possibilities. Had Marcus accused her of stealing something from the house? Had Isabella claimed Elena had threatened her? "Did I do something wrong?" "No," David assured her quickly. "But there are some things about your past that need to be discussed. Mr. Sterling asked me to bring them here." Elena looked at Thomas, who had grown very still. "I should take Maya back to the guest house." "Actually," a familiar voice said from the doorway, "I think Maya should hear this too." Elena turned to find Alexander entering the sunroom, but he looked different. Grim, angry, and somehow dangerous in a way she'd never seen before. Behind him were two police officers and a woman Elena didn't recognize, carrying what appeared to be official documents. "Alexander," Thomas asked, "what's this about?" "It's about the night 7 years ago when Elena's life changed forever," Alexander replied, his gray eyes never leaving Elena's face. "And about the people who have been manipulating her ever since." Elena felt the world tilt slightly. "What are you talking about?" Alexander moved closer, his expression softening as he saw her genuine confusion. "Elena, do you remember working at the Greenfield Hotel 7 years ago?" "Yes," Elena said slowly. "I was a server there for about 6 months. But I don't understand what that has to do with." "Do you remember the night of March 15th? There was a corporate event, a celebration for Sterling Enterprises' acquisition of Pacific Foods." Elena searched her memory. 7 years was a long time, and she'd worked dozens of corporate events during her time at the hotel. "I remember some of it. There was an incident. Someone drugged a guest's drink, and there was a lot of chaos." "The guest who was drugged was me," Alexander said quietly. Elena stared at him. "You?" "Someone named Victoria Cross slipped something into my drink, intending to compromise me into a relationship. But you intervened, didn't you?" Elena's head was spinning. "I remember there was a man who seemed ill, disoriented. I helped him to his room because the hotel staff was overwhelmed with the police investigation. But I don't remember." She stopped, her face going pale. "Oh my God. You stayed with me that night," Alexander continued gently, "to make sure I was safe, that nothing happened to me while I was incapacitated." Elena felt her knees grow weak. Maya looked up from her book, sensing the tension in the room but not understanding it. Thomas reached over and took the child's hand, his own expression grave. "Maya," Elena whispered, the full implications hitting her. "Maya, you're my daughter," Alexander confirmed. "Our daughter." The silence that followed was deafening. Elena sank into a chair, her mind struggling to process what she was hearing. The police officer stepped forward with a gentle expression. "Ms. Chen, we've been investigating Victoria Cross for fraud related to her design awards. During our investigation, we discovered evidence of a conspiracy involving your former partner, Marcus Webb." Elena looked up sharply. "Marcus? Victoria Cross paid him $2 million 7 years ago," the officer continued. "His job was to keep you isolated, to prevent you from having any contact with Alexander Sterling or the Sterling family. When you got pregnant, he was supposed to ensure you never discovered who the father was." "That's impossible," Elena said weakly. "Marcus loved me. We were together for 7 years." "You were together because he was being paid to be with you," Alexander said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "And when Victoria offered him a better deal, marriage to Isabella Liu and a legitimate fortune instead of secret payments, he took it." Elena felt sick. "The house, the money I saved, was used as a down payment on Isabella's house," the female investigator confirmed. "Marcus transferred the funds and put the deed in her name, just as Victoria instructed." "But why?" Elena asked, tears beginning to fall. Why would Victoria go to such lengths? Alexander's expression grew even darker. Because she was obsessed with marrying into the Sterling family. When her original plan failed, when you prevented her from compromising me, she decided to eliminate any competition. If you never knew Maya was my daughter, never had any connection to my family, then Victoria could eventually find another way to approach me. Thomas Sterling, who had been listening in growing fury, suddenly stood up. Despite his age and condition, he looked formidable. You're telling me that this woman, this Victoria Cross, has been manipulating my granddaughter's life for 7 years? Keeping her from her father, keeping her from me. Granddaughter? Maya asked in a small voice. Elena knelt beside her daughter's chair, taking the child's hands in hers. Maya, sweetheart, do you remember when we talked about how some children have different families than others? Maya nodded solemnly. It turns out that your daddy isn't Uncle Marcus after all. Your real daddy is Alexander, and Thomas is your grandfather. Maya looked around the room at all the serious adult faces, then at Alexander, who was watching her with an expression of wonder and terror. Are you a good daddy? Maya asked him directly. Alexander crouched down to her level, his voice gentle. I didn't know I was a daddy until today, Maya. But I'd like to try to be a good one if you'll let me. Maya considered this seriously. Will you read me bedtime stories? Every night if you want me to. And help Mama when she's sad. Alexander's eyes met Elena's across their daughter's head. Always. Maya nodded decisively. Okay. I think you can be my daddy. Despite everything, the revelations, the betrayal, the complete upheaval of everything she believed about her life, Elena found herself smiling through her tears at her daughter's simple acceptance. But the police officer wasn't finished. Miss Chen, we've arrested Victoria Cross on fraud charges, and we have warrants out for Marcus Webb and Isabella Liu for conspiracy and theft. But we need your cooperation to build the strongest possible case. Elena wiped her eyes, her natural strength reasserting itself. What do you need from me? Testimony about the 7 years of manipulation, documentation of the financial theft, and... The officer paused. We need to know if you want to press charges for what was essentially kidnapping. Kidnapping? Alexander's voice was ice. Victoria arranged for 3 of our children to be taken from the hospital after you gave birth. Elena's blood froze. What? You had quadruplets, Elena, Alexander said gently. Maya has 3 brothers. Victoria told the hospital staff they had died, but actually had them taken and abandoned. They were supposed to die, but we didn't, a young voice said from the doorway. Everyone turned to see 3 7-year-old boys standing in the sunroom entrance, flanked by David Morrison and what appeared to be social workers. The boys were clearly Maya's siblings. They had the same dark hair, the same intelligent eyes, the same determined expression. Elena's vision blurred. She stood on shaking legs, staring at the 3 children she had grieved for 7 years. James, Daniel, Oliver. The oldest boy stepped forward. We've been looking for you, Mama. And then Elena was on her knees, gathering her 3 lost sons into her arms while Maya launched herself into the group hug. Alexander watched the reunion with tears in his own eyes, while Thomas Sterling sat down heavily, overwhelmed by the sudden discovery that he had not 1 great-grandchild, but 4. How? Elena managed through her tears. How are you alive? Monks found us by a river, the middle boy, Daniel, explained matter-of-factly. Master Li raised us at the temple. He taught us that our parents were alive and that we'd find them when we were ready. We've been training to protect our family, Oliver, the youngest, added proudly. We're really good fighters now. Elena looked up at Alexander, who was watching the scene with an expression of awe and overwhelming emotion. In the span of an hour, he had gone from being a lonely billionaire to being the father of 4 children and connected to a woman who had been manipulated away from him for 7 years. What happens now? Elena asked quietly. Alexander moved closer, kneeling beside the family huddle. Now we make sure Victoria Cross and everyone who helped her pays for what they did. Now we give our children the family they were supposed to have all along." He reached out hesitantly, and Elena took his hand. "Now we start over together." Thomas Sterling, watching from his chair, smiled through his own tears. For the first time in years, the Sterling mansion felt like a real home. And for the first time in 7 years, Elena Chen felt like her family was finally complete. But the story was far from over. Victoria Cross might be in custody, but her network of manipulation ran deep. Marcus Webb and Isabella Liu were still free, still dangerous, and still motivated by greed and revenge. The road ahead would be difficult, full of legal battles and emotional healing. But as Elena held her 4 children close while their father and grandfather looked on with love and determination, she knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The noodle vendor's unexpected love story was just beginning. The Sterling family's legal battle against Victoria Cross and her conspirators dominated Seattle's news for weeks. Elena found herself thrust into a spotlight she'd never wanted, portrayed alternately as a victim of an elaborate conspiracy and as a gold digger who had somehow orchestrated her own rescue. The truth, as always, was more complicated than either narrative suggested. "You don't have to do this," Alexander told her as they sat in his lawyer's office, preparing for another day of depositions. "We have enough evidence to convict Victoria without your testimony." Elena shook her head firmly. "She stole 7 years from us, Alexander. 7 years when our children could have known their father, when your father could have known his grandchildren. I won't let her escape justice because testifying is uncomfortable for me." The children were adapting to their new life with the resilience that Elena was learning was characteristic of the Sterling family. Maya had taken to her role as big sister with enthusiasm, teaching her brothers about life outside the monastery while they taught her some of the martial arts forms they'd learned. Thomas Sterling had experienced a remarkable improvement in his condition since the children's arrival. The doctors attributed it to having a sense of purpose again, a reason to stay present and engaged. But the adjustment wasn't without challenges. Elena struggled with a sudden shift from independence to interdependence. From making all decisions alone to being part of a family unit she was still learning to navigate. Alexander, meanwhile, was discovering that being a father to 4 intelligent, strong-willed children was perhaps the most difficult challenge he'd ever faced. "James, you can't solve disagreements with your sister by challenging her to combat," Alexander said one evening after breaking up a fight about television privileges. "Why not?" James asked reasonably. "It's efficient. Because in civilized society, we use words to resolve conflicts." "Master Li says words are just another form of combat," Daniel added helpfully. "The goal is still to defeat your opponent." Alexander looked to Elena for help, but she was trying not to laugh. "Boys," she said gently, "your father is right. We don't fight to solve problems in this family. We talk things through." "But what if talking doesn't work?" Oliver asked. "Then we find a compromise," Elena explained. "Something where everyone gets part of what they want." The boys considered this seriously. Then James nodded. "Like a strategic alliance instead of total victory." "Exactly like that," Alexander agreed, shooting Elena a grateful look. These small domestic moments were interspersed with the larger drama of the legal proceedings. Victoria Cross, faced with overwhelming evidence of her crimes, had pled guilty to fraud and conspiracy charges. But she was also cooperating with prosecutors, revealing the full extent of her network and the methods she'd used to manipulate Elena's life. "She hired private investigators to monitor you," the district attorney explained during one of their meetings. "Every job you applied for, every person you met, every decision you made. She knew about it and influenced it when possible." Elena felt violated in a way that went beyond the financial theft. "How many people were involved?" "More than you might think. The landlord who repeatedly raised your rent to keep you financially stressed. The childcare center that rejected Maya's application, forcing you to work irregular hours. Even some of your customers at the noodle cart were paid to leave bad reviews online." Alexander's hand found Elena's under the table, squeezing gently. It's over now. She can't hurt you anymore. But Marcus Webb and Isabella Liu remained at large, having fled to Isabella's family properties in Hong Kong as soon as Victoria's arrest became public. International warrants had been issued, but the process of extradition would be long and uncertain. Do you think they'll ever face justice? Elena asked Alexander one night as they sat on the guest house porch, watching their children play in the garden under Thomas's watchful eye. Eventually, Alexander replied. But honestly, Elena, they're not the ones who matter anymore. Victoria was the architect of this whole scheme. Marcus and Isabella were just tools. Elena was quiet for a moment, processing not just his words but the situation they found themselves in. 3 weeks after learning the truth about their past, they were still living in careful proximity. Elena and the children in the guest house, Alexander in the main mansion. They were co-parenting successfully, building a friendship based on mutual respect and shared concern for their children. But the question of what came next, of what they meant to each other beyond being Maya's parents, remained unspoken. Alexander, Elena said finally, what are we doing here? He turned to look at her, his gray eyes serious in the evening light. What do you mean? I mean this. She gestured toward the estate, the children, the comfortable domestic scene they'd created. Is this temporary? Are we just figuring things out until we can establish separate lives? Or is this something more? Alexander was quiet for so long that Elena began to regret asking. But finally he spoke. What do you want it to be? I asked you first. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Elena, 3 weeks ago I was a workaholic bachelor whose biggest relationship challenge was avoiding gold diggers at corporate events. Now I have 4 children and I'm... He paused, seeming to search for words. I'm happier than I've ever been in my life. Elena felt her heart skip. Because of the children. Because of you. All of you. Because for the first time, this house feels like a home instead of a museum. Alexander shifted in his chair to face her fully. But I don't want to pressure you. You've been manipulated and controlled for 7 years. The last thing you need is another man telling you what your life should look like. Elena considered this, watching Maya teach her brothers to identify different types of flowers in Thomas's garden. What if I told you that being with you doesn't feel like being controlled? What if I told you that for the first time in years, I feel like I'm choosing my own path? Alexander's expression grew hopeful. What if I told you that I'm falling in love with you? Not because you're the mother of my children, but because you're the strongest, kindest, most remarkable woman I've ever met. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. What if I told you that I'm already in love with you? That I have been since the night you showed up at my noodle cart, worried about your father? Alexander leaned closer. What if I told you that I want to marry you? Not because of obligation or convenience, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it. What if I said yes? Elena whispered. Alexander's kiss was gentle, tentative, as if he were afraid she might change her mind. But Elena kissed him back with a certainty that surprised her. This was right. This was what she wanted. You, Dad's kissing Mom. Oliver's voice carried across the garden, followed by giggling from his siblings. Elena and Alexander broke apart, laughing. I guess we have an audience, Elena said. I guess we do. Alexander stood and offered her his hand. Shall we go tell them they're about to get a proper family? As they walked hand in hand toward their children, Elena marveled at how much her life had changed. 6 months ago, she'd been a struggling single mother with no idea who her daughter's father was. 3 weeks ago, she'd lost everything she thought mattered. Now she was part of something she'd never dared to dream of, a real family, built on love and truth instead of deception and manipulation. There's one more thing, Alexander said as they approached the children. My father wants to formally adopt the boys, to make sure they have the same legal protections and inheritance rights as Maya. Elena looked over at Thomas Sterling, who was now on his knees in the garden helping Daniel catch fireflies. He doesn't have to do that. He wants to. He says he's missed 7 years of being their grandfather, and he intends to make up for lost time. As if sensing their conversation, Thomas looked up and waved. Elena. Alexander. Come here, the boys are teaching me about meditation techniques. Apparently, I need to center my chi. Elena laughed, recognizing the phrase from James's frequent lectures about mental discipline. Coming, Thomas. As the Sterling family gathered in the garden that evening, 3 generations brought together by kindness, perseverance, and love, Elena thought about the noodle vendor who had served an old man because it was the right thing to do. That woman could never have imagined this outcome, could never have envisioned the love story that would grow from such a simple act of compassion. But then again, the best love stories are often the ones we never see coming. They sneak up on us while we're busy being decent human beings, while we're focused on taking care of the people we love, while we're simply trying to do right by the world around us. Elena Chen had started as a single mother trying to survive. She had become Elena Sterling, matriarch of a family that had been scattered by cruelty but reunited by love. And as she watched her husband-to-be attempt to learn meditation from their 7-year-old sons while their daughter explained the finer points of flower arranging to her great-grandfather, Elena knew that this was just the beginning of their story. The noodle vendor's unexpected love had become something even more precious. A family's unexpected beginning. 5 years later, the Sterling Community Kitchen was bustling with activity on a crisp October morning. Elena Sterling moved through the industrial-sized kitchen with practiced efficiency, supervising the preparation of meals that would feed 500 homeless individuals that day. Her noodle recipe, refined and elevated but still recognizably the same comfort food that had brought Alexander's father such joy, was now served in 12 Sterling-funded kitchens across the Pacific Northwest. "Mom, the delivery truck is here," Maya called out, now 11 years old and growing more like her mother every day. Compassionate, organized, and absolutely determined to make the world better. "Thank you, sweetheart. Tell them to use the north entrance." Elena wiped her hands on her apron and turned to check on the massive stockpots of broth that were the kitchen's signature offering. In the 5 years since Victoria Cross's conviction and imprisonment, the Sterling family had used their resources and platform to address the kind of systematic problems that had once made Elena's life so precarious. The Sterling Foundation now funded affordable housing projects, job training programs, and childcare centers across 3 states. Alexander had discovered that using his business acumen for social good was far more satisfying than simply accumulating wealth. "Elena!" Thomas Sterling's voice carried across the kitchen, still strong despite his 78 years. His dementia had stabilized remarkably after the family reunion, and while he had good days and bad days, he remained actively involved in the family's philanthropic work. The mayor's office called. "They want to discuss expanding the program to Tacoma." "Tell them I'll call back after lunch," Elena replied, smiling at her father-in-law. Thomas had indeed formally adopted James, Daniel, and Oliver, and the boys had taken to calling him Grandpa Tom, with a kind of casual affection that still made Thomas tear up occasionally. Speaking of the boys, they were currently across town at Seattle Academy, where they'd been enrolled after much discussion about whether their unconventional upbringing had prepared them for traditional education. As it turned out, children raised by monks made excellent students. They were disciplined, focused, and possessed an unusual combination of intellectual curiosity and physical capability that made them popular with both teachers and classmates. Mrs. Sterling. A young woman approached hesitantly, wearing the uniform of the community college culinary program that Elena had helped establish. "I finished the inventory of the dry goods storage. We're running low on rice and dried seaweed." "Thank you, Jessica. Add them to tomorrow's supply order." Elena had become Dr. Elena Sterling 2 years ago, completing her degree in nutrition and food service management through a program she'd designed specifically for working adults. The title felt good, but not as good as seeing young people like Jessica develop skills that would give them economic stability. The kitchen's double doors swung open, and Alexander entered with his usual purposeful stride. Even in his casual clothes, jeans and a Sterling Foundation polo shirt, he carried himself with the confidence of a man accustomed to command. But the way his face lit up when he saw Elena was pure personal joy, not professional satisfaction. "How's the health department inspection going?" he asked, kissing her cheek as he surveyed the organized chaos of meal preparation. "Clean bill of health as always," Elena replied. "What brings you down from the corporate tower?" "Board meeting finished early, and I wanted to see my wife." Alexander's smile was the same one that had first made Elena's heart skip 5 years ago, but now it was seasoned with the deep contentment of a man who'd found his place in the world. "Also, Maya called my office. Something about a school project." "Science fair," Maya said, appearing at her father's elbow with a clipboard and serious expression. "I'm doing a study on nutritional density in comfort foods, and I need funding for supplies." Alexander and Elena exchanged amused glances. Their daughter had definitely inherited the sterling head for business, but she was applying it to causes that would have made her great-grandmother proud. "How much funding?" Alexander asked with mock seriousness. $200 should cover it. I've prepared a detailed budget breakdown." Maya handed him the clipboard, which indeed contained a meticulously planned expense report. "Approved," Alexander said without looking at the numbers. "But I want quarterly progress reports." "Deal." Maya shook his hand with the gravity of a seasoned negotiator, then bounced away to help with lunch service. Elena watched the interaction with deep satisfaction. This was what family looked like. Not the manipulation and control that had characterized her relationship with Marcus, but genuine care, mutual respect, and shared purpose. "There's something else," Alexander said quietly, moving closer to Elena as the kitchen activity continued around them. "David got a call from Hong Kong. Marcus and Isabella have been arrested." Elena felt a familiar tension in her shoulders. Finally. Financial fraud, as it turns out. Isabella's family business was a house of cards, and when it collapsed, it took them down with it. "They'll be extradited within the month." Elena was surprised to find that she felt mostly relief rather than satisfaction. "Will we need to testify again?" "Probably. But Elena, this means it's finally over. Victoria's appeals have been exhausted, Marcus and Isabella will face justice, and all the legal loose ends will be tied up." Elena nodded, then returned her attention to the meal service. The past was important for learning and healing, but the present demanded her focus. Hundreds of people depended on the Sterling community kitchens, and Elena took that responsibility seriously. "Mom!" James appeared at her side, having arrived from school with his brothers. At 12, he was already showing signs of the height he'd inherited from Alexander, but his serious demeanor was pure Elena. "Daniel got in trouble again." "What kind of trouble?" Elena asked, though she had a pretty good idea. Tommy Brennan was bullying a 6th grader, so Daniel mediated the situation. Elena sighed. "Please tell me he didn't break anything important." "Just Tommy's nose," Oliver said cheerfully, arriving with Daniel in tow. "And it was already crooked anyway." Daniel, the most impulsive of the 3 boys, looked appropriately contrite. "He was hurting someone smaller than him, Mom. Master Lee always said." "Master Lee also said to use minimum necessary force," James interrupted. "You could have stopped him without breaking his nose." Alexander crouched down to Daniel's level. "Son, we've talked about this. You can't solve every problem with martial arts." "But he was being really mean," Daniel protested. "And the teachers weren't doing anything." Elena and Alexander exchanged a look that contained 5 years of parenting experience. Their children had strong moral compasses and the physical capability to enforce their beliefs, which occasionally created interesting challenges for school administrators. "Daniel," Elena said gently, "defending people who can't defend themselves is admirable. But you need to try words first, then involve adults, then use physical intervention only if someone is in real danger." "Understood." Daniel nodded solemnly. "Understood. But what if?" "No what-ifs," Alexander said firmly. "Those are the rules." As the family settled into the rhythm of afternoon meal service, Elena marveled at how natural it had become to work alongside her husband and children. The Sterling Community Kitchen wasn't just a charitable endeavor. It was a family business in the truest sense, a place where everyone contributed according to their abilities and shared in both the work and the satisfaction of helping others. Thomas Sterling, manning the service line with the enthusiasm of a man half his age, caught Elena's eye and winked. "Best job I ever had," he called out. Elena smiled back, thinking of the confused, lost man she'd served noodles to 5 years ago. That simple act of kindness had started a chain reaction that had transformed multiple lives, created a family, and established a foundation that would help thousands of people over the years to come. Mrs. Sterling, a teenager with worn clothes and nervous eyes, approached the service counter. "Is it true that you give out job applications with the meals?" "It is," Elena replied warmly. "Are you interested in working?" "Yes, ma'am. I aged out of foster care last month, and I need to find steady work." Elena reached under the counter for an application, but also made a mental note. This young man would need more than just a job. He'd need stability, mentorship, and the kind of support system that could prevent him from falling through society's cracks. "Fill this out and bring it back tomorrow," she told him. "Ask for me specifically. We'll talk about what you're looking for and what we might be able to offer." As the teenager walked away clutching the application, Alexander appeared at Elena's side. "Another one. Another one," Elena confirmed. "We're going to need to expand the job training program again. I'll talk to the board next week." Alexander's tone was matter-of-fact. Expanding their social programs was simply what they did when they identified need. This was the life Elena had never dared to dream of, not because of the wealth or the mansions or the social status, but because of the purpose. Every day, she and her family worked to make their corner of the world better. Every day, they used their resources and privileges to lift up people who needed help. Every day, they demonstrated that kindness could multiply exponentially when it was backed by genuine commitment and adequate resources. As closing time approached and the kitchen began winding down its operations for the day, Elena found herself standing in the doorway, watching her family. Alexander was teaching Oliver how to properly sanitize prep surfaces. Maya was showing a volunteer how to organize inventory more efficiently. James and Daniel were loading leftover supplies into containers for tomorrow's service. Thomas was regaling anyone who would listen with stories about the early days of Sterling Enterprises, when he'd built the company that would eventually fund all their charitable work. This was her legacy, Elena realized. Not just the community kitchens or the affordable housing or the job training programs, but the family that would continue this work long after she was gone. Maya already talked about studying nonprofit management in college. The boys discussed their plans to use their martial arts skills in service of social justice. Even Thomas, in his 70s, was making plans for educational programs that would outlive him. "Ready to go home?" Alexander asked, appearing at her side with his jacket draped over his arm. "Ready," Elena replied, taking his offered hand. As the Sterling family walked out of the community kitchen together, 4 children chattering about homework and school projects and weekend plans, grandparents and parents discussing foundation business and family logistics, Elena thought about the woman who had served noodles from a cart 6 years ago. That woman had been strong, kind, and hardworking, but she'd been trapped by circumstances beyond her control. Elena Sterling was those same things, but she was also free. Free to choose how to spend her time, free to pursue her own education and interests, free to use her resources to help others escape the kind of systematic oppression she'd once faced. The noodle vendor's unexpected love had become a platform for justice, a foundation for generosity, and a legacy of hope. Sometimes the most important love stories are the ones that reach beyond romance to encompass whole communities, whole movements, whole generations of positive change. Elena Chan had found her soulmate in Alexander Sterling, but more importantly, they had found their purpose together. And in a world that often felt divided by greed and selfishness, the Sterling family stood as proof that love multiplied is always stronger than hate concentrated. Their story had started with a bowl of noodles shared with a stranger, but it had become something much larger, a testament to the transformative power of kindness, the importance of family, and the possibility that even the most cynical realities could be changed by people who refused to accept that suffering was inevitable. The noodle vendor's unexpected love had become the Seattle community's expected source of hope. And that, Elena thought as she squeezed her husband's hand while their children ran ahead toward their car, was the most beautiful ending she could have imagined.